Hey everybody, Jason Bermas here. We got a great show lined up for you today. A few weeks back, I got to have a great conversation with Gareth Icke. Now, if you are unfamiliar with Gareth Icke, I will bet that you are more familiar with his father. Yes, the one and only David Icke. We've had David on this program several times over the years, and I highly respect not only David's work, but what he's been able to do with the Ickonic network and his son, Gareth. Gareth is a very, very intelligent, introspective, independent thinker that truly does make his father proud on a daily basis. So we talked everything from Charlie Kirk to reverse cancel culture to the state of Israel, public perception, and beyond. It is a banger of an episode. But before we get there, I do want to remind everybody, I need your support. I am not going to be able to do this without you guys. $5, $10, $15. It does mean the world to me. Big donors, thank you so much. You can also hit me up on the PayPal because truly, folks, this is independent media at its finest. This is not a left or right perspective. In many cases, this is a perspective where you will get nowhere else other than programs like this one, networks like this one that let free thinkers and independents like myself speak, and of course, the Ickonic network and David Icke. So, buckle up and get ready for this great conversation with Gareth Icke as we make sense of the madness.
Jason Bermas is an American independent journalist, documentary filmmaker, and activist. Jason has consistently ran head-on at controversial topics and has long called for government transparency across the board. At a time of great uncertainty in the United States and indeed the world, calm and reasoned voices have never been more important. Jason, welcome to the show. It must be a strange time for yourself and others doing what you do in the USA in the aftermath of the assassination of Charlie Kirk, because essentially he does what you do, right?
Well, let me say it like this. I actually got a call from my brother probably about 20 minutes after the incident. That's how I found out. I was on the road. I was in DC. I was supposed to be introducing Tucker Carlson in only a few more hours, or it was either that or the next day. I'm trying to place everything together. In fact, I think it was the next day. I think the assassination took place on the 10th. I was speaking at the 11th. But when he did tell me that, first of all, I was disgusted. I got sick to my stomach. I've never met Charlie. I don't know Charlie. I was supposed to have Charlie on my broadcast about a year and a half ago, and he canceled. And quite frankly, I was going to focus on the fact that he was one of the few mainliners out there that was making the connection between the transgender to transhuman movement, which I thought was extremely important and kind of underplayed. I got to tell you, I mean, I'm just so disturbed and disgusted, not only by what happened, but by the reaction of some people, even those that vehemently disagreed with him. And what it reminded me of, Gareth, was when I was a much younger man, actually even younger than Charlie. I was probably about 26 at the time. Michael Reagan, the son of Ronald Reagan, former president, he had a talk show. And he had essentially called for me and the other two filmmakers to be shot in front of the firing squad. That's what we deserve for what we had done with Loose Change by questioning 9/11. And I'm sure that you can relate, as your father has traveled around the globe in front of large amounts of people, speaking about information that has certainly rubbed people the wrong way. The idea that we have taken essentially what we should have learned about from these assassinations of political figures in the 60s, and now we are full circle in 2025 and beginning to see this again on an extended level, should frighten everybody, Gareth. It should disturb everybody. And it should really make those who aren't necessarily political, left or right, which I am not, more active in the arena and more active in the arena of defending free speech. Because ultimately, what I would hate to see happen, and honestly, what I believe Charlie would hate to see happen, is somehow, some way, this event being used to push free speech limitations, gun restrictions, or some of the very things that he was preaching against in these debates. So it's a very disturbing time. I will say this, although, I certainly am questioning whether or not we have the full story, whether or not they have the correct individual. I would be much more worried if they did not have somebody in custody, for the sole factor that this could be continuing and that you could have more political assassinations of figures that aren't running for office. And again, that is a chilling idea to have, but I think it's the correct one.
I think I'm the same, mate. It's interesting because I've seen a lot of these people that are very pro free speech. That's how they've made their name. People like Matt Walsh famously tweeted about a year ago saying that the whole point of freedom of speech is for people you dislike to say stuff you dislike. He's now going on social media saying, look how many people I've got fired for stuff they said. Do you want me to continue? And the mob's going, yeah, get them all sacked. And you're like, right, okay, I agree with you. I'm not sure, that's really playing into the freedom of speech stuff. And then I'm thinking, is this a catalyst for something major? Like, are they trying to stir up the hatred to create something bigger? If I'm going to say civil war, it sounds dead melodramatic, but you get my point, Well,
they certainly tried to sell that scenario, not only to the American public, but to the globe. I'll give you a great example. Probably it's got to be 3, maybe 4 months ago when we first had the beginnings of some of the protests via what was going on with the Trump administration and ICE and what was going on the left coast. And my old boss from Today's News Talk, which is now Pulse, it's an outfit out of Australia, he had me on and he said, well, Jason, is this going to expand? Are we going to get into civil war? And this has been hammered for years now, even before this second Trump administration, that somehow the United States is going to have a civil war. Let me assure you of something. An actual civil war is an utter impossibility in this country for numerous reasons. And a couple of those reasons are if logistically you look at the size of the population during the actual civil war in this country and what it is today, they're just not even comparable. And then you go to the idea of, in that same time period, the citizenry in large part was armed with the same things that the government was armed with. Neither of those things is true. So what could we get? Well, we certainly could get pockets of violence in cities, in metropolitan areas, and then you could have small points of impact in smaller communities. And what does that mean? Political assassinations, other type of criminal behavior cloaked in the idea of politics. And just from things taking place in a large city, small pockets, and the way that the media would portray it could put us in a position where all of a sudden the government does step in martial law style. And it would not be a civil war, I assure you. It would be something much, if it's possible, much more grotesque at the end. Because at the end of the day of the Civil War, we did heal in large part. We did come together. Are there cultural differences in this country? Absolutely. It's kind of funny, Gareth. A lot of people don't believe this, or probably won't believe this when I say it. But when I was a kid, a teenager, I must have been either in late middle school or early high school. We'd always had kind of this gag where people would talk about people from the South really believe that they're the ones that won the Civil War. And sure enough, absolutely. I remember we met a bunch of kids on a field trip in the South, and they were spending the week there. So we were able to spend some time with them outside of school, and we brought it up, and very much so. They felt like they had won the Civil War, or the North didn't completely win. So in that time frame in this country, things were kind of taught a little bit differently across the board. I really do feel we've lost that. I don't know whether or not that was positive or not, but it shows you the massive amounts of spin, if you will, that can be placed on major events and have a huge cultural impact into generations. And right now, this is something that I don't believe is being spun by region, but unfortunately by political ideology. Okay. And, when you look at these political ideologies, in many cases, they are extremely poisonous. You just pointed out the fact that you have so many people on the quote unquote right wing, the supposed champions of free speech at this time, going out and trying to get people fired. In fact, J.D. Vance, the vice president of the United States, actually instructed people to do that same thing. Look, I don't like the celebration of death. In fact, I learned a long time ago that even if it's somebody that I think is completely reprehensible, I do not celebrate their death. And I'll bring you back to that story. I don't know if you remember, Gareth, but there was a press secretary named Tony Snow under the W administration, the Bush administration. And he passed rather young. And it was probably about 15 years ago. And I had put up a social media post saying, thinking I was clever, saying it's snowing in hell. And I was contacted by a fellow radio host. And he said, man, I knew Tony, and I knew him beyond him because, he had worked at Fox News before becoming the press secretary. He's like, he had a family. He was a good man. I may not have agreed with his politics, but we certainly don't have to bask in his death. And that really hit me. I said, you know what? You're right. I'm like, even on the day that Dick Cheney goes, I'm not celebrating. It's not going to happen because I wouldn't want people to celebrate my death. And that is yet another thing that just exploded in my mind. How many people would have cheered, 15, 20 years ago when 9/11 truth was at its peak, had I been executed in front of a bunch of people? How many people would cheer today? And that is something that is extremely unsettling because, as you know, Gareth, I'm not perfect. I'm a human being. I'm going to make mistakes. But sincerely, I believe that I've got nothing but love in my heart. And I don't wish death and destruction on my political enemies or enemies in general. I want to make the world a better place. And in order to do that, you've got to start with not only how you're thinking, but how you act in certain situations. And there are going to be times where maybe your instincts aren't the best and you got to take a step back. And I'm seeing very, very little of that right now, which is extremely troubling and unfortunate.
This is my issue with that, mate, is like you said, you're a really nice guy. You've got love in your heart. You're about unity. Yeah, you put that post up, going those years back. Everyone makes mistakes. Everyone says things that they might think afterwards, I probably shouldn't have said that. That was a bit stupid. That was a bit rude. That was a bit nasty. We've all done it. And I think that's my issue with the fact that even above the free speech argument is that argument of someone should be able to contact your employer and intimidate your employer. Bear in mind, this is coming from the vice president. Intimidate your employer into taking away your ability to feed your family and pay your rent because you said something douchey on social media or something out of order. I think that's the thing. Like I've said this for a couple of days now. I don't agree with people being fired and people are coming back at me going, well, there should be consequences. It's like, yeah, but there's a balance. Like the consequences can be that person is seen to be a complete dick and is seen to say something nasty. Whereas I think the consequence of taking away their ability to feed their kids, that doesn't sit right with me, mate, to be honest.
It not only does it not sit right with me, but what if they're not being a dick, right? Like, what if it's a large scale event? We're not just talking about an individual, but we are talking about a 9/11 style event. Or maybe you're expressing your displeasure with this administration and how it's handling Venezuela. And for whatever reason, that conflict has heated up. We're supposed to be able to separate our personal and our professional lives. And if I'm doing my job and my job doesn't have anything to do with my political or social viewpoints that are supposed to be out there outside of the arena of work, it should have nothing to do with it. And I got to agree with you. It is insane right now that people would try to curb their speech to keep their jobs. Because I always say this, when we talk about freedom of speech is not for the stuff that everybody's saying in the moment, at the time. And in fact, sometimes it is for the most abhorrent, disturbing, and disgusting of speech, whether it's in the moment or historically just gross, right?
Yeah.
And the thing is, I don't want people to be curbed in what they say. Let me know who you are. This is the big thing that I've had with arguments with people who do want to restrict speech. And, well, this is a dog whistle and this person's really a racist. Well, if that's the case and you're correct, let's hear what they really have to say. Let's amplify what they want to actually say. I want to know who that person is. I don't want them talking around it. I want people to have genuine reflection and then maybe some humility that they are a human being, that they can make mistakes. And quite frankly, are we in this for any reason to preach the choir, or are we in it to bring people away from dangerous positions? Are we in it to bring people towards unity, or are we trying to push them into divisiveness? When I see people, for instance, posting not just civil war, but this is war. Who are you at war with? Exactly. Are you truly at war with your neighbor across the street that maybe you've seen once or twice barbecuing outside with their kids because they have different political views than you? That is completely and totally insane. I will tell you right now, I'm going to be the first to lend a helping hand to help somebody carry something in, to possibly jump their car if their battery dies, despite their political beliefs. I could care less about those things and more about the community that surrounds me and the fact that they're able to have a family, to live like they want, to have the opportunity to make a living for that family, just like you said prior. So again, I really, really believe, and the media, unfortunately, is playing into this, that we are moving in the wrong direction.
So that's what I was going to ask you, mate. Is like, I'm looking now, I'm seeing like the big, high profile influencers, which to be fair, we used to talk about influencers 10 years ago. It was like, why are you talking about that? But actually, because the mainstream media is basically dead now, these influencers on social media have more sway and more power in terms of people's perceptions than probably CNN and Fox News do, certainly with the younger demographic. So what I'm seeing from these influencers is basically calling for the dismantling of the left, the destruction of the left, revenge. Laura Loomer, incredibly hateful woman, is basically saying you shouldn't forgive and love your enemies. You should be vicious. That was her term. You need to be vicious. Is that something that's just social media being social media, or is that something that's genuinely an opinion that's growing on the streets of the USA?
Unfortunately, I think it's both, right? You certainly have those individuals that are stoking that anger. But as far as individuals taking that mindset, I truly believe that it's there. And I do think that is unfortunate. And I think that those people that would play into that anger well, you get ready to be labeled a fascist again. Get ready to have all these labels that aren't necessarily you, because now you want to do some type of physical harm to an ideology. I got news for you. You can't do physical harm to an ideology, whether that's liberalism or conservatism. And, that's one of the reasons that I've had great respect for your father all these years. Number one, he has vehemently maintained an anti-war stance, no matter who was in charge or what the conflict was. And he has always vehemently stated that these things are not about left and right. No, they are about right and wrong. And you can do that with every single issue, Gareth. That is the truth of the matter. And this issue in particular, no matter what ball cap you're wearing, if you're playing political team baseball in this country, you can take that ball cap off and be totally and completely disgusted with the type of political violence that we're now seeing in real time. Not only was this caught in high definition and all over social media within moments of it happening, but it was also done in front of a live audience of 3,000 young people. Whoever and whatever they did this for, why they did it, unfortunately, this was extremely effective in not only saturating the media sphere, but as you said, saturating the social media sphere. And I'm a bit older, right? I'm pushing 50 at this point. I'm 46 years old. I don't have a TikTok. A lot of people want me to get one. Oh, that's the place where you can go viral, Jason. Instagram, the same exact thing. The only time I've ever used my Instagram is when I was running a bar and I had to do the social media for the bar. I learned a long time ago, back in the MySpace days, just like any other piece of technology, Gareth, you can use it to empower people. You can use it to enslave people. Just like a hammer, it can build a house or it can bash a head in. And unfortunately, when you're on social media, the vast majority of people, the only thing they're trying to do is build their following or build their brand. And they're willing to bash anybody they can to get there. If they think that's going to elevate them, they will do it. So many people treat this like nothing more than a job or a career, and they take the humanity out of it. Okay? That, again, especially living in the post-truth world, which we are fully in right now, okay, is extremely dangerous and volatile. And again, I hope it is a reflective moment for that younger generation of, younger 30-somethings all the way down into teens, that maybe a reaction video celebrating a political figure that you really didn't know anything about, that at best, maybe you watched a couple clips of that person. You certainly didn't watch him debate for a few hours, even one time, and you're going to give your take on how you're happy or how that person deserved to die. They weren't, listen, words aren't violence, Gareth. Okay, the only time that I can even entertain the idea of words being violence is when a political or military leader is literally directing his troops or units to kill. Yeah. Okay, to kill or that's it. All right. Otherwise, I'm sorry, no matter what is coming out of my mouth or somebody else's mouth is no physical danger to you and yours. And that needs to be recognized. And it can never be met with force, especially that type of force that took two children's father away, took a husband away from their wife. And I really, again, hope that these are the lessons that people learn and the points that get emphasized on the greater scale.
I hope you're enjoying the show so far. I'm sure if you're watching this, you're very much aware of the growing surveillance state emerging all around us. Whatever you do, you're being watched and your data being harvested. This is why Glenn and Eric Mader formed the Privacy Academy. Join the community designed to help overwhelmed, non-techie people like me learn how to get private online. Head over to privacyacademy.com/Icke and learn how to exit the surveillance state with regular webinars exclusively for you. Now, back to the show. You're so right in terms of people acting like it's a job. And I think the algorithms are there to create that because from what I see, they promote the extremes of both sides massively because they get the big, huge followings, the huge numbers, they set off against each other, everyone else underneath it looking at it gets involved. But those that are in the middle, which I consider myself and I would consider yourself, that's maybe stood there going, hang on a minute, like these are two extremes of the same thing, like they're acting the same, they're serving the same agenda. We get nothing. It's like, we'll suppress that. What people that are out there saying, we're just one human family, we need to come together no matter what you believe. We've got more in common with each other than those that claim to represent us. They don't want our voices amplified. They don't want that.
And I wish I could disagree with you. In fact, I think you're spot on. But this is what I would say. Let's take X as a platform, right? And I already mentioned how, you've got to utilize these social media networks in a manner where you can make connections. I mean, the way we made a connection for this broadcast was through X. Currently, I've been doing a lot of these open debate panels, which are now in video format, and then spaces on the largest account that does them, the Mario Nawful account. And if you don't know who Mario is, he's not usually on the spaces, but he's definitely tried to create some type of a media network on X and certainly does lean conservative and what some people would call right wing. I'm going to tell you right now, Gareth, they're true believers. They think X is a free speech platform. And it's only been me kind of integrating with them on the back end because of my debate skills, because of my ability to not only bring up information, show my work, but then debate somebody in a clear and concise manner that doesn't want to just come and attack me. After the fact, a lot of these people end up saying, well, I actually do agree with Jason on this one, and I'm glad that we can have that conversation. That should be your goal on these type of panels, on these type of forums. Not to dunk on the other guy, not to go in there and win, but to go in there and have a conversation where you might have the possibility of finding common ground and then changing somebody's perspective or having them concede to an idea or a notion. And, again, that's one of the great things that your father's work has done. It has reverberated globally to the people that question things, to the people that don't just accept the government line. And that's what we have to move into. I don't know that social media is ever going to be free. Who knows? Maybe the Mario gang is shooting themselves in the foot by giving Jason Bermas such a large platform. I guess time will tell. But at the same time, I would hate to see people like myself start to compromise for the algorithm or start to compromise for a job or start to compromise for an elevated position in the influencer sphere. I think it is extremely hard not only to break through, but to stay relevant when you are in a position like myself or yourself where you're not playing to either side or the masses. But at the same time, as much as I need to make a living and I need to pay my bills and I got to make sure that my niece's volleyball is played, I'm never going to sell my soul. I've said it before and I'll say it again. If I don't make a living at this, I will get another job. I will shovel shit if I have to. I will do what it takes. My mind's not for sale. My voice is not for sale. And as soon as people try to move me in that direction, I'm out. I'm full out. And I just wish that more people had that attitude. But unfortunately, as a species, humanity is just not as principled as it needs to be. And I would also say this, in this country, we have lost something that is great in the terms of civics and debate. We don't teach it anymore. Gareth, when I was in third grade, when I was 10 years old, there were two things that kind of sat with me. Number one, we would get up and it would be once a month, and we would do debate panels where, 3 people on each side would take a position, and then it's 10 years old, and the 3 people on the other side would take a position, and we debate. Okay? It's huge. It's what you want. You want an open conversation. And then one of the other things that was for a bonus is once a week, you could come in with a news story, and you'd get up in front of the class, and you'd basically have 2 to 5 minutes to describe that news story and give your opinion on it. Now, when I first started doing this, I would come in, I'd have the news story, but then I'd have something written up. Very early on, maybe within the first 2 or 3 of these that I'd done for extra credit, I no longer even had to write anything down. I literally have a newspaper at 10 years old on the bus. I'd have a highlighter pen. I'd choose my story. I'd have the highlights, and I'd be able to speak on the fly about that issue. I'm not even a preteen. Do we do that anymore with our young people? Do we do that with our middle schoolers, our high schoolers, or even, those in college? Well, I can assure you we don't do it with those in college. You have all these introductory 100 level classes in that arena. And for me, the idea that you don't have a civics type course or a debate or a discourse type course is why we've moved in the wrong direction. And just to speak to the college aspect of this, another memory I have about my academic career is that I was taking summer classes because I needed to stay in college. And I was taking a philosophy course. And pretty early on, this guy, was selling us on this idea with, what would you do if you were all stuck on an island and you had no way to go into the outside world and you guys had to share everything? And I could tell right away what he was trying to do. I go, yeah, you're selling me on communism. And I got news for you. I've seen the group we're in. There's about 15 of us. There's about 3 women. Okay, so there's 12 guys. I'm not sharing my girlfriend. I'm like, sorry. I'm like, there's always going to be something that somebody wants that they can't have from me. And that doesn't mean that I won't help them build their house, or I won't help them to gather or hunt for food. And we can't share those things. But let's not create a system where out of the gates, no matter what I do, I can't prosper from my work, or that person can't prosper from their work. So, I'm talking about a class I took probably in 98, 99. Unfortunately, that type of collectivist mentality, whether you want to call it socialism, communism, etc., has been extremely prevalent in the academic arenas, not just in the Harvards and the Yales, etc., but in the state schools like mine, the SUNY program. For those that don't know what that is, it is a multitude of colleges in New York and really throughout the country, Gareth.
I'm thinking of Lord of the Flies now, and how it doesn't end that well on the island. For me, when I look at politics, I think, I'm not a huge fan of politics, but if you're going to have a political system, you need to have both sides, because then that prevents the extremes. The one, like you're talking about the debate, one holds the other to account. Each side, gets a little bit, have to give up a little bit of what they wanted, but they get a bit of what they wanted. Whereas now, both sides, it seems, are trying to be winning, so busy winning and destroying the other side. It's like, yeah, but if you win and destroy the other side, what you end up with is essentially half the nation is disenfranchised and disillusioned. That's not going to end well for anyone. But because I'm always trying to find a positive in stuff, it's just how I'm made up. One thing I will take away from this that I've noticed in amongst all this hate and division and stuff is that actually people are asking more questions than I remember. So in terms of what happened to Charlie, people are bringing up Israel when they probably wouldn't have done that before. People are bringing up the fact that he started to go slightly against them, the donors had pulled out. There's questions being, he was against the Iran war and vocally so. And all I can say for certain, Jason, is I don't feel like this is just one mixed up middle-class liberal kid acting on his own. Even if he's involved in it, this kid, I just think it's bigger than that.
Well, let me say this. There's been one question that I haven't really seen answered. That certainly casts some doubt on whether or not this is the person. Again, I'm reserving judgment. I want to keep seeing all of the evidence and what they have on this kid. But if you watch the video of the individual before they get on the roof, they're kind of limping. Okay. So that would kind of make you think that the gun has been fully assembled for whatever reason. And maybe it's slid down their pant leg, or they're over here, they're hiding it at the very moment before they go up. Well, when you watch the person jump off the roof and run away, there's no limp and there's no gun. Okay. And then later on, when they claim that this person's partner and roommate, who is also supposedly transgender, is told where the weapon is via text, mind you, not through a conversation with this individual. And all I will say is anything digital like that can absolutely be spoofed. It can be made to look as though it is from a person when it is not from that person. The locations of the weapon were correct, but the weapon was fully assembled. Now, I can't really fathom why somebody would reassemble a weapon they were trying to get rid of after a murder. That's one of those questions. And, let me speak to the Israeli / anti-war aspect of Kirk. Back when Loose Change was at its apex, I was marching with the left a lot. I was marching with groups such as Code Pink, etc. That Overton window has totally changed to the point where, starting about 3 years ago, I started speaking on the Reawaken America tour with a bunch of high-level conservatives, including Don Jr., Eric, Mike Lindell, Kash Patel. I mean, every single person that you see within that administration and in their circle spoke on that tour. All of a sudden, the right wing was giving me a voice. That should further illustrate the idea that, free speech is not a right or left issue. But Charlie, like so many others, and maybe it was because he was a young person and had seen the debacle that was our presence in the Middle East, had shifted that conversation away from neoconservatism. And even when discussing the Ukraine and Russia conflict, when people would come on and say, oh no, this is going to be 5 years or 10 years or 20, he'd be like, what? He's like, what? When is this going to end? He was not bloodthirsty. And just like you said, beginning to question Israel and what they've done in the Middle East when so many others had not. Greta Van Stussen had Netanyahu on. Have you seen this interview yet?
Yeah. I saw that and I thought the lady doth protest too much. That was my takeaway.
Well, let me say this. Just the fact that was asked on television, despite her viewpoint, should let you know that this conversation is being had about Israel and in regards to Charlie. You have that kind of unnerving statement by Harrison Smith of InfoWars just about a week before the assassination, when someone calls in, asks about Kirk's positions in the Middle East, and he says that he has talked to one of Charlie Kirk's best friends, and he said he was fearing that Israel would kill him. Again, that's third hand. I'm just putting it out there because it is in the public arena. Candace Owens went live yesterday and made claims about Bill Ackman and what he had said to Charlie in meetings and discussions. Ackman had to come out and try to refute that right away. But let me tell you something that's not refutable, okay, and is 100% correct. Tucker Carlson, who actually did cancel for the Turning the Tide 9/11 event, and this was a big event, Gareth. You know, we had Ron Johnson, current U.S. Senator there. We had Kurt Weldon, the former congressman that had brought Able Danger to the table and actually had hearings in the United States on it. We had Dennis Kucinich, who had been vehemently anti-war and actually impeached the Bush administration on 30 plus articles, the last 3 of which were actually in regards to 9/11. We had Dana Rohrabacher there. This was an individual that I specifically remember back in the day before we invaded Iraq, being on Real Time with Bill Maher and saying that these people, once we took out Saddam, they would be throwing flowers at our feet and thanking us. All of those individuals were there to say, hey, we've been lied to about 9/11 and we need the truth. Well, Tucker Carlson was about to put out a 5-part documentary series on 9/11, and that has now been postponed. And how did he tease that, Gareth? Well, he went on Piers Morgan and started talking about the Israeli spy ring that had been picked up prior to 9/11, the quote unquote dancing Israelis that were picked up on 9/11, and those picked up after. Charlie Kirk and Tucker Carlson were extremely close. Can you imagine a world, and I could have imagined it, only a day prior or only moments prior to Kirk's assassination, that Tucker Carlson puts that first video online. It has to do with the Israeli subject matter, and Charlie Kirk, his good friend, reposts that and talks about the importance of looking at that information. Now, if you have somebody that is 31 years old with as much political power and financial backing as Charlie Kirk, this isn't a Steve Bannon, maybe dipping his toes in, etc. This is somebody with a much cleaner slate doing that. That's going to cause problems and issues with that younger demographic, and therefore the greater demographic of not only this country, but the world. So look, I'm waiting to see this Tucker Carlson documentary as of yet. I don't know when he plans on releasing it, but I also think that would have been problematic for a lot of people if all of a sudden Charlie Kirk, this somewhat mainline conservative individual, started questioning 9/11.
100%, mate. 100%. I'm with you. I'm reserving judgment, but at this moment in time, I'm not the lone wolf. It's too Lee Harvey Oswald for me, mate. It doesn't feel comfortable. Just finally, Jason, where can people find you? Where can people? Because obviously you're speaking all the time. You're always, obviously, you've got your podcast, but you're speaking at these panel events and on these spaces as well. So where can people find you?
Everything is at Jason Bermas. That's BERMAS. That's where you can find me on X. I'm also on Rumble, Rockfin, but somehow, some way, Gareth, after 5 years of literal stagnation, of not just 0 followers, but literally negative followers on YouTube, somehow in the last 5 months, we've been able to gain about 4,000 subscribers. We're still not monetized, and we're not expected to be. No. But you can not only check out my literal 3,000 videos since 2007 when I had the channel, but you can check out all of my documentary films for free. I've got 2 on 9/11 that are extremely powerful, extremely important: Loose Change Final Cut and Fabled Enemies. And then my bigger picture films, Invisible Empire, A New World Order Defined, and Shade the Motion Picture for free in the playlist documentary section. And I think that these films, although I haven't put one out in literally 12 years at this point, are as important, if not more important today than they were, and they hold up. So if you want to see how the real world works and you're kind of annoyed by my voice, you don't want to see me just running my mouth, check out the documentaries and please share them far and wide, because this thing is not about money. Okay? It's never been about money to me. This is about us coming together as humanity and going after, for real, not the person across the street that has a hot take, but holding those to account that are destructive to humanity, that don't want to empower humanity, that want to enslave and eviscerate humanity. And that's what I've dedicated my life to.
Brilliant. Cheers, Jason. Thanks so much for joining us, mate. Most people watching this will have almost certainly watched Loose Change. For one, that was a game changer for a lot of people. It's time to make another documentary then, mate. 12 years, too long. It's not like you've got nothing to make a documentary on nowadays, mate. And there's going to be plenty more in the future. But cheers for joining us, mate. I love talking to you, and I'll catch up with you again shortly, I'm sure.
Thank you, Gareth.
Folks, that is going to do it. I really, really do enjoy talking to Gareth Icke. We're going to be doing so more and more on this broadcast. And it's always nice to get a feel for somebody outside of the States and what their perception of what is going on is. I do want to remind everybody, I need your support now more than ever. Please consider donating to the broadcast, supporting Patriot TV, and so much more. And remember, folks, to this guy, it is not about left or right. Oh, no, no, no. It is always about right and wrong. And I hope that you out there have that same type of drive and discernment, that you realize that good and evil actually exist, that it's always not about a party line, liberal or conservative. I absolutely love you guys, and I will see you all on the flip side.